That's it, right? Well, what I'm going to do now is I want to show you a slide that's different. This is a different circumstance. When there's accidents and illnesses, everybody comes and hugs and loves and supports. This is a terrible thing that happened to your family. We want to be there with you. We want to be there for you. We want to do whatever we can do for you because that's what we do as a community. That's why communities hold each other together, except when it's a suicide event. All that compassionate care begins to wither because nobody wants to. What do you say? How do you talk about it? Suicide death creates a feeling of shame. Parents feel like that people are thinking it's parents' fault. Must have done something wrong, and the whole thing gets flipped over. And I guess this slide has a big impact on me because what I want to say to you is this. When your neighbors or your friends or your family members suffer, the suffering can be minimized when you can stand with them and cry with them and be with them. Because that's how we heal. But this is a bit of a different circumstance. I don't know that it's a bit because it's Robbinsville. I don't think that's true. But whether I'm in Bridgewater or whether I'm in Princeton or whether I'm down in Egg Harbor or wherever I am, what we know is I want to elevate this because your reaction to a death matters to your children and their well-being and how they get through a tragedy of no making of their own. So here are the goals. We're going to talk about youth suicide. We're going to talk about risk factors and warning signs and treatment. Because the more, and this is research that came out of CDC, the more you know, and we do this, there's a mandated 2-hour, for school systems and for school staff. The more teachers know and staff knows, the more you know. Doesn't make you an expert, just enhances your ability to understand what you see and know what to do with it, where to refer and who to talk to. Because when we weave it together as parents and staff, when we work together as adults, our kids are healthier. It's just the way it is. So they're tonight's goals. I already mentioned this, right? It's a public health issue. It was declared so some 30 years ago so that there's federal information behind it, federal money behind it. And there is federal information behind it from CDC. I can tell you this, that every year in New Jersey, about 82 of our young people, our adolescents, die by suicide. And we are number 49 of 50 states in being able to prevent suicide. We're doing really well compared to the nation. But my goodness, how could I tell a parent whose child died by suicide that we're doing really well and we're number 49? How could we say that? Because one is too many. So 0 is what we're looking for. It's a public health issue. And if we don't talk about it, we jeopardize survivors. God bless you. If we don't talk about it in a helpful way, we jeopardize survivors. Now, there are some myths and rumors out there. Here's one of them. One of the myths and rumors says, if you talk about suicide, you're going to plant the seed in somebody, you're going to make them think about dying. Not true, not true. 30 years of research, there's nothing. In fact, what research says, what survivors or what those attempt survivors will tell you, the minute somebody says, I'm worried about you, are you thinking about taking your own life, they feel connected and relieved that somebody listened, cares, and reaches out. Talking about it does not plant the seed. Stigma sabotages. Talking about it enhances it. I can tell you this about your school system. This is regardless of where you stand about the school system. I've been in public education for 37 years. And I know that many parents like their school district, and then there are parents who don't. I get that. Maybe that's not what goes on with your problems. Maybe this is an idyllic place to live. Maybe I'll just trying to love everybody. Yeah, probably from the lab. That's probably not true, but let that one go. I can tell you this, that I got the call from the school district immediately when the word came in that that young boy died. Actually, I got the call even before he died. Just to say this terrible thing has happened to us. We just spent some time. We need to begin to do some planning because we're not quite sure how the rest of our kids are going to receive this information. Kudos to the staff. I've sat in the room with the principal of this high school, with the superintendent, with guidance, with counselors, with teachers. And what I found is that people here act immediately. They want to do the right thing immediately by getting information out that's helpful. Here are the principles we're going to talk about. The reason it extends far beyond that, there are 3 peaks of suicide. I'm going to tell you this because I want you to be aware. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death in New Jersey for kids between the ages of 10 and 24. It is the 3rd leading cause of death among our children between ages 10 and 24. It does peak at about 19, 20, 21 when our kids transition and go off to college. And those of you that have connections with some colleges know that some of our kids make that smooth transition, and some of our kids, because of their anxiety, because of their, keep it on anxiety right now, because that's really the #1 thing that kind of gets ratcheted up with some of our kids. And that's where there will be an increase in drinking, there will be an increase in marijuana use. And we saw that because, I was an adjunct at the TCNJ and part of the clinic there, and the number of freshmen that used to come in just really anxious. Conversation for a different time. How can you avoid that? Conversation for a different time. But what I want to tell you is that's one piece. The other piece is ages 35 to 45 age, particularly white males, although our females are increasing, suicide deaths. And then there's a big spike among our senior citizens, 80 and older. There's a common thread that runs through all of them. Some of those common threads are hopelessness, which is why we began the slide about hopefulness, because that's your job. That's your job. Your job is to beat the drum of hopefulness. We'll get through this. Reach out and ask about that counselor or teacher or coach at school. I mentioned this at the other training. Help seeking is a critical protective factor. Now, here's where you're going to get caught behind. Perhaps you've messaged your kids to say, hey, don't be talking about any stuff that goes on here at home. Don't you be talking about this to anybody, so therefore you extinguish this help seeking. Because they're kids, you're adults, they're kids. They get affected by stuff that goes on at home. Even if it's temporary stuff, mom and dad are getting along, somebody loses their job, somebody gets ill, the dog dies. Don't extinguish their ability to help seek. It's a protective factor, and it minimizes the risk here. The other issue is burdensomeness. That happens mostly in our seniors. They feel like a burden. You lose social supports. You don't feel connected. Kids and adults will tell me this, George, if I died, nobody would miss me. They wouldn't know I was gone. Not that that's true for your family, but sometimes it's true for the kids that feel it. So connection and attachment, critically important protective factors for you and your children. This is what we're doing tonight. If we promote too much independence, the message is you don't need other people. If we don't need other people, we are more and more isolated. If we're more and more isolated, we don't have the ability to kind of lean back and somebody will catch us. So it's really important that we promote connectedness, certainly within the family. And then the other social opportunity, and you guys do this, right? You sign your kids up for soccer or softball or tennis, something where they're connected to a group. Very, very important. Because of the number, and there's a really good number of you folks in the room tonight, because of the number, I will make the assumption that there are folks in this room whose personal lives have already been touched by suicide or suicidal thinking. And let me explain that. It could be when you were growing up. It could be a family member or a friend who's died by suicide. It could be a work colleague that's died by suicide. And what we know is that if you've had that experience, when you hear about it close to home, you feel that original sadness, sorrow, angst all over again. Because don't forget, the body keeps the score. The body holds on to bad times, to memories of bad times, and it gets triggered and it gets affected by new tragedies. I bring that up because what I don't want to have happen tonight is, and one of the reasons why we ask that your children not be invited, because when we're doing a big group presentation like this, I'm not quite sure how the information lands. And if I have a vulnerable kid in the audience, and we say what we say here, and I give you an example of what I'm talking about, I'm not quite sure where that's going inside of that kid who doesn't have a whole lot of life experience, and are they going to go home and just kind of be in their heads about what they saw or what they heard. I trust a little bit more of the overall health of this group, although it doesn't mean that you are without your own vulnerabilities. So therefore, if the conversation over the next hour somehow just kind of brings up that old stuff, I know there are folks in the room that you can sit with, talk with, help you kind of get calm back down again, because talking about it can bring up personal experiences. Sometimes you won't know who those folks are. Sometimes you won't even know that that's one of your kids in your own house, in your own nest, who's thinking about it or researching it or may have attempted or taken some pills and didn't require hospitalization. You would know that. So we have to kind of pay a little bit more attention to that. That piece there is that we really need to be extra super sensitive to survivors, to family members and close friends. And then that gets back into the attachment, and that gets also back into the issue of connectedness within the community. You won't hear me say the word commit suicide. Suicide survivors have said to us in the field, you know, when I hear you say the word, it puts it in the same category as commit a crime, commit a sin. So we don't use that word commit suicide. You'll hear me say die by suicide, took their own life. You won't hear me say phrases like a successful suicide, because there's nothing successful about dying because of your misery. You won't hear us use that word. So that's a sensitivity to survivors. That's a sensitivity, even if I don't know you're a survivor, I want to make sure that I don't offend you or hurt you in the conversation. We just talked about that tonight. The reason this night was provided, and the reason why these folks did that outreach in the hours and days following the death here in Robbinsville, is because survivors feel isolated, responsible sometimes, and they feel blamed. They should have said something. Should have known. Why didn't I? Was it something I missed? That's what they go through. Because when you think about it, the only person who can answer the question why is the person who died. This haunts parents, family members, siblings, community members, because there is no good answer to that. So we want to be really respectful of those who are suicide survivors.